Set phasers to yum and prepare to accelerate your brewing to warp speed with Imperial Yeast's new spring seasonal strain, AO5 Voyager. With its high flocculation characteristics and wide temperature range, Voyager is an extremely flexible strain for fermenting styles ranging from old school ESBs to modern IPAs. At lower temperatures, Voyager produces nutty flavors in malt-forward beers, while warmer temps produce apricot and peach aromas, perfect for those hoppy IPAs. AO5 Voyager is available now through the end of May 2019, so get some while you can. The options are as expansive as the universe. Beer is the beautiful and delicious amalgamation of four primary ingredients: water, yeast, hops, and of course malt, the latter of which comes in a few different forms. Now, in pretty much every beer recipe out there, base malt makes up the largest proportion of the grain bill, and while most popular types tend to be on the paler and arguably less characterful end of the spectrum, there are some base malts that bring a bit more to the game. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and in this episode, contributor Phil Rusher joins me to chat about a couple of somewhat misunderstood base malts.
That's right. We got the misunderstood, I guess you can call them the redheaded stepchildren of the base malt world.
They sure are.
Seldom used, but definitely delicious in their own regard.
Absolutely. Well, and the thing about Vienna and Munich, we are going to talk about both of those malts in this episode, is that, and you know, I'm guilty. A lot of people mistake them as being specialty malts of some sort, but they are in fact base malts. I do think that as our awareness of brewing ingredients and our knowledge about brewing in general grows, people are starting to understand things more. But back when I first got started, you when you talked about base malts, you were talking about pale two-row, Maris Otter, and Pilsner malt primarily. And people were using Vienna and Munich at 5 to 10% of the grain bill, but they are base malts.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I did the same thing when I first started too. You just get that standard list of these are the base malts you should be considering and probably nothing else. So it's easy to understand why both of us and probably most other people made that mistake of thinking that these are actually specialty malts.
Absolutely.
Because they're so unique and they have their own great characteristics.
Yeah.
They absolutely can be used as a character or specialty malt.
Yeah, that's true. And that's the thing. That goes, the case for, I think, most malts out there. But these days, I've really come to appreciate both Vienna and Munich malt and have quite a bit of experience using each in various ways. We're going to be talking about that as well as some fascinating results from an experiment I performed comparing the two. Listen, if you're a regular listener of this show and would like to make sure that you get to keep listening to it, there are a few things you can do to help us out. First off, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/brewlosophy. By making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive some neat rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at Yakima Valley Hops, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with someone in the brewing world coming up later this month. Is the one, the only Drew Beecham, host of the Experimental Brewing Podcast and author of the new book, Simple Homebrewing, where he and Denny Kahn talk about making great beer with less work and more fun. That book is now available on Amazon and anywhere else you buy your brewing books. It's going to be a good Q&A. Past guests have included folks like John Palmer, Vinny Chilurzo, and John Kimmich, to name a few, and all past sessions are available on our private Facebook page, so patrons can go back and check those out whenever they like. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/brewlosophy. If you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and a review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we'd really appreciate that as well. I noticed recently that we reached the 500 rating mark, which is pretty rad. That's over an Apple Podcast. So cheers to everyone who's already done that for us as well. Feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers a bunch of cool stainless equipment like the turnkey BH15 Pilot Brewing System, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Brewers Hardware also has a ton of unique purpose-built products useful to both professionals and homebrewers. Go see for yourself at brewershardware.com and make sure you mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. All right, Phil, this one is very relevant because you were on the episode with me that we talked about coffee, which Adam Marley had some feedback on. This guy's from Australia, and he said, listening to episode 89 now, I had a thought when you and Phil were discussing the green pepper flavor you sometimes notice in coffee beers. I am a coffee roaster by trade, and while it isn't as prevalent in darker roasts, green pepper or capsicum is absolutely a flavor that can be found in coffee. In fact, it's very common in the sometimes not very well done lighter roasts that are common these days. As a roaster, if I encounter this flavor in a coffee, I would say the coffee may have been underdeveloped in the roast. Not that it's a guarantee in lighter roast, it's just easier to notice in them and harder to avoid. As well, the extraction and consumption of the coffee within beer may make this more noticeable than when brewed with water. That's an interesting point.
That is totally interesting.
I believe it may be caused by pyrazines in the same way it appears in Sauvignon Blanc. It wouldn't surprise me if a local microbreweries are using coffee from local small batch coffee roasteries, where light, sometimes underdeveloped roast might not be terribly uncommon. In terms of variability, it makes perfect sense to me that a brewery's coffee beer may change batch to batch due to batch differences in the coffee used. I'm certainly no coffee expert, but this sounds like a plausible idea to me. It's definitely true that the local breweries around me, when they're making their coffee beers, I think all of them are buying coffee from local, small craft roasters. What do you think, Phil?
I definitely agree with that. I think most people who are making coffee beers these days are doing the whole hyper local thing, which is awesome. And that's really interesting. I hadn't considered that, and I don't think I would have even thought to consider it. And I'm trying to remember which one of those beers that I made had the coffee character. It might have been both. I can't remember what I did this morning, let alone 6 months ago. So.
Same, yeah. Daddy bread.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, that's really interesting. I'm gonna have to look that up now.
Yeah, that show was not very long ago, just a month or so. And since then I've had a couple coffee beers, and I'm biased to kind of pick out the green pepper thing, and I haven't tasted it. That character, whatever it is, the local breweries around me are doing, don't seem to be getting it as much lately as it was when I first started tasting coffee beers. So, but thanks for the feedback, Adam. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com. Leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320 or drop us a note on social media. All right, believed by some to be a passing fad, Brut IPA is known for being super dry, crisp, and bubbly, as well as very hop forward. Listener Jordan Folks from Portland, Oregon brewed up a batch he thought turned out well and sent me a bottle to taste with my friends.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim. There's nothing you can do at Presser. We've already reviewed it with our eyes, and we know it to be a pale ale. Don't you think? Look at it.
Could be sour also.
Go past the initial texture.
Oh, no.
It's not?
No, it's IPA.
Well, no, I said a pale ale. We don't do IPA. We say pale ale. That encompasses everything. We won't be made to look like fools. You know
I
this.
could tell. It's like I'm sniffing a juniper bush.
I smell some pine,
I'm ready to clean the baseboard. A little pine.
I'm kind of pining to take a sip.
Oh, dear God.
You look terrible. You hate it.
Let me hold on.
No, dude. See,
you know what? It's not that bad.
I'm disappointed.
Seriously.
I feel like we've come to the point where we like everything because we assume everything is better than us.
No. I mean, after the second taste, put it this way. I went out to the fridge earlier to grab a Miller Lite, and I grabbed
How long is this story
an
going to take?
Easy Jack IPA. For me, that's unheard of.
What does that have to do with?
I'm kind of liking this.
Yesterday I mowed the lawn.
You never mow the lawn.
That's true.
I mow your lawn.
You do mow my lawn. Could you clean my pool filters tomorrow, by the way?
I will.
Okay, well, if it's an IPA and that's your final answer, then I'll take a sip because that's my
good.
wheelhouse.
You know what I like about it? I mean, it's the smells there right at the start, which I don't like, but there's no aftertaste. It doesn't linger on in my mouth.
Literally the most you've said about a beer in all the time that we've been doing this. I'm so fucking proud of you. I don't even want to drink it.
Is that a tear in your eye?
There's a tear in this beer.
It's good.
Yeah, it's an IPA and it's delicious.
I can't believe I'm actually enjoying
your first
this.
instinct, I thought you hated it, but this is really good.
I did it.
Give me a second. I'll tell you exactly what's in this thing.
I know
you ready?
will. Damn, crush it.
Oh, it's good.
It is good.
Oh, it's really good. It's been a long time since I've actually really, really liked a
This
beer that we've
might
done.
be the best IPA I've ever had.
See, dude, I know it's an IPA. In my heart, I know.
And it may not even be
but
an IPA.
But if we say it is and we're wrong, we're going to be made to look like fools. Let's go with our hearts. This is an IPA, and I love it.
I do like this.
So I'm going to give it 10 jerseys. Dude, I'm giving it 10 jerseys.
I'm going 11.
An average of 6.9 Jersey Tims. Dude, this is a delicious beer.
The best IPA Tim has ever had. 10
Strong
Jersey
words.
Tims. A delicious beer. Jordan, I think the review speaks for itself. And while I was a bit hesitant to jump onto the whole Brut IPA thing, yours was absolutely fantastic. Everything I expect from, I guess, this kind of newfangled style. Very, very dry, very carbonated, super crisp. I could have inhaled an entire keg of this beer easily within a couple of days. Phil, have you ever made a Brut IPA or had the opportunity to try a well-made one?
I did have Sierra Nevada's Brut IPA a couple months ago. It was very nice. That's the only one I've ever had, actually. And in hearing this review, though, I'm sort of getting the inspiration to bite the bullet here and do it.
I know, me too. This was the, so I think I've said this before on the show. I've had probably 7 or 8 Brut IPAs. I've had the Sierra Nevada one, and I love Sierra Nevada. I was not a fan of that one.
Yeah, it was fine.
Yeah, it wasn't special. You know what it tasted like? Sierra Nevada to me. I love their house character or whatever that is, but it just didn't work for me. A couple local breweries had one, House of Pendragon and then Riley's brewing company out here in Fresno. They both had really good examples. Jordan's Brut IPA, I'm telling you, I'm going to have to steal that recipe from him. We've done a couple of experiments on the enzymes used to chop up those sugars so that the beer can dry out a lot. I'm just not sure which one he used or what he went with to get this beer so crisp, but it was fantastic. If anyone out there is making really delicious Brut IPAs, hey, I'll take them. You can send them in, them or any other fermented beverage that you want reviewed by Jersey and Tim. You can send them in. Email me, Marshall@brulosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. All right, we've got to take a quick break. When we come back, Vienna and Munich malts. So I've been hanging out with brewers and craft beer nerds for a long time now, and while we do occasionally have our differences, one thing it seems we all share is a love of learning and trying new things, as well as saving a couple of bucks. Well, right now, Craft Beer and Brewing is helping fans of Brulosophy learn more while saving some coin by offering 20% off the price of a subscription to their awesome magazine. Chock full of brewing insights, tips, and recipes from industry experts, Craft Beer and Brewing is seriously great. I read every issue page to page myself. To get 20% off your subscription, all you have to do is sign up at beerandbrewing.com/brulosophy.
Just as the Grainfather all-in-one brewing system revolutionized all-grain brewing at home, the Grainfather conical fermenter and glycol chiller take this one step further by giving homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation, just like commercial breweries use. With a full array of features including insulated double-walled construction, an innovative dual-valve yeast dump and sampling tap, and an integrated heating element and temperature controller, the conical fermenter provides a professional quality fermenting environment for superior temperature control. With the ability to individually power and control the temperature of up to 4 Grainfather conical fermenters, each with their own fermenting schedule, the Grainfather glycol chiller is the perfect addition to ensure superior fermenting results. And for a limited time, you can save 10% on your order by going to grainfather.com and entering coupon code NZB during checkout. Once again, enter coupon code NZB when you order the Grainfather conical fermenter or glycol chiller at grainfather.com. Once again, that's grainfather.com.
Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the Exhilarator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exhilarator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. Despite their regional monikers, both Vienna and Munich malts are used by brewers around the world to impart unique characteristics to any number of beer styles, ranging from pale lager all the way up to rich imperial stout. I've used it at something like 30% of the grist in a stout myself. But before we get into talking about these, what the characteristics that these malts impart, why don't we start off by briefly going over what exactly is meant by base malt in the first place?
So when designing any beer recipe, you're generally going to be using large proportions of one grain that is really highly fermentable, and that's what we call a base malt. Generally, as we talked about before, this comes in the form of like a Pilsen or a two-row pale malt or Mersader, or, as we're going to talk about today, Vienna and Munich malt.
Right. And the, I think base kind of, it's kind of like the way I like to refer to it is like the canvas onto which we paint using, other character malts and hops and whatnot. But I think most simply put, base malt is going to be the majority of the grist in your, and, a lot of people will do blends. They might even use Pilsner and Pale. So as compared to malts like crystal malt or roasted grains, caramel malts, all that stuff, base malts can be used at 100% of the grist typically. And they really are what make up the brunt of the malt character of a beer is how.
Absolutely. Yeah. And because they don't have those kind of toasty, roasty characteristics that those higher kilned malts you talked about before have.
Right.
They have, more diastatic power. They're able to convert starches into fermentable sugars much more readily than their higher kilned counterparts.
Exactly. Yeah. So now Vienna and Munich, again, they are both totally base malts, and which means that they have the ability to self-convert their starches into fermentable sugars. They can be used at 100% of the grist. They do get confused as specialty malts. Just to clarify, these are base malts. There are a couple different types of Munich malt. The one we're going to focus on the most, I think, in this show is probably Munich Light, or what people would call Munich 10 Love, or whatever it is. But it is a bit darker than Vienna malt. Vienna malt being almost, to me, it's almost kind of like a more characterful version of pale malt.
Yeah, exactly. I think of it very much like Mersader, actually.
Right.
Obviously, it's going to differ depending on the barley variety and the growing and the malt stir, all that stuff, but it's pretty similar.
So when we're talking about Vienna and Munich malts, really they are two-row malts, and they're going to be, depending on what maltster and who's growing, they might be of a different various different species of malt of barley, but they are going to be generally two-row barley malts that get their character from the kilning and roasting process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the biggest primary differences between Vienna and Munich is really just the degree to which they are malted. And the length of time that they are kilned.
Tell us more about that.
Well, generally when you're making any sort of malted barley, the process is very similar, and the longer you expose the already germinated barley to heat, the more of those toasty, sort of caramelized flavors and aromas you're going to extract from that grain. Yeah. So Vienna, being the lighter one of the two, usually comes in around like 3 or 4 degrees Lovibond, whereas Munich is, like you said, is 10. And actually, if you're going in Munich too, it's going to be even like 20 plus.
Upwards of 20. Yeah, I've seen that as well.
Yeah. So usually with Vienna malt, it'll germinate for like 10 days or whatever, and then it'll be kilned for about 24 hours, and usually in the range of 95 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 35, 38 degrees Celsius. Mm-hmm. And it usually ramps up in temperature at the tail end, like maybe like 6 or 8 hours left in the kilning process.
They ramp the temp up a little bit, and my understanding is that that's part of the way that they kind of impart. You get, when I first learned about Vienna malt, particularly when I was accepting that it was a base malt, the idea was that it is used to impart more of a toasty, kind of a malty, sweet, toasty type of character. I'm imagining that that's probably due to this ramping up in temperature at the end of the kilning process.
Yeah, absolutely. And the temperatures used prior to that are more so just to convert those sugars and also just kind of lock all those sugars and proteins in so they don't get lost later down the line. After we ramp up that temperature to as high as 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius, we're left with malted barley that's usually, like I said, between 3 and 4 degrees Lovibond. And because it had sort of a less robust malting process, we have a lot of enzymes that are left over within the grain kernels that can convert those sugars. Usually, Vienna malt comes in around like maybe 90 to 100 diastatic power, which is like more than double the amount that's required to self-convert.
Right.
From there, we get like maybe 9 to 12% residual protein left over, which is pretty standard.
And that's going to be something that has an impact on both, correct me if I'm wrong, but on mouthfeel and foam stability and those types of things.
Foam and mouthfeel.
Yeah.
It'll be nice, chewy, not necessarily chewy, but it'll be a bit more, bit heavier than just pale malt or Pilsner.
Yeah. In my experience using high proportions of Vienna malt in beers, one of the things that I've noticed about it, and this isn't side by side, so it's just kind of an anecdotal experience, I guess, but one of the interesting things that I've noticed about it, first off, it is very pale. The first time I made a 100% Vienna malt beer, I guess I expected it, even though I knew that it was, I think the Weirmann that I was using back a couple of years ago was like 3.5 Love, something like that. Mm-hmm. Even though I knew it was low, I still expected it to be a little bit darker that first time, but it wasn't. It almost looks like a Pilsner, maybe a tad darker than that, more golden than it is, pale yellow. But one of the things that I noticed about it that was really surprising to me was how, even when I mashed at 148 degrees Fahrenheit, pretty low, that mouthfeel was still very noticeably kind of not thick or syrupy, but nice and full.
You just noticed it. Yeah.
I felt like I
different.
noticed it.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have been wrong, but.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is all our own subjective experience.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so after we finish kilning, we're left with this barley product that has sort of a sweet, grainy, malty, and some people might say ever so slightly toasty flavor and aroma.
That's what I've heard as well.
It's definitely more on the grainy, sweet side than it is toasty, though.
Well, and so then, given those characteristics that are associated with this malt, there are a couple styles that are, I guess technically you kind of have to use Vienna malt in. One of those, unsurprisingly, is Vienna Lager, which is one of my favorites. But let's talk about what styles, you think that a Vienna malt might be used in to really bump up the flavor. What do you have experience using Vienna malt in?
I played around with Vienna malt a lot. So I actually think it works really well in basically any style you might want to make. I actually made a pale ale over the spring with, I think it was like 90% Vienna malt, and it was very, very nice. Yeah,
I'm with you. I think Vienna malt can be used in pretty much any style. In fact, if I'm running low on pale malt, sometimes I'm not gonna hesitate to just grab some Vienna and replace my pale or Pilsner malt with it. It's not one of those malts that, in my experience, is incredibly overpowering.
No. It does really well at bringing in some more malt flavor without overshining any of the characteristic that you're looking to have showcased, like a pale ale or IPA or whatever.
Totally. I've made an IPA. I think I had an 80% Vienna malt and then sprinkled in, I think I did like Vienna malt MO and a little bit of Pilsner or something one time in an IPA. Uh-huh. And it was fantastic. Again, I the more malt you use, I'm talking about actual, amount of malt, in my experience, that you use, you are contributing more of that malt flavor. And so to get, if you're trying to make a traditional West Coast style IPA that does have some malt flavor while still being dry and clean and not caramelly, to me, adding that Vienna does contribute that maltiness. Now, I feel like we have to kind of distinguish a little bit between, or to at least talk about what we mean by malt character. To me, when I open up my my grain bin and that smell that comes out, that to me is malt character, right? That's kind of what I'm looking for. And Vienna has that nice light version of that I just absolutely love.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's also with the lighter ones, it's just like slightly different. Like I feel like the lighter, like Pilsner or like pale malt is definitely crisper, and it's like I don't know, sweeter. And almost it tastes like, I don't want to say apple, but it's, it has like some sort of like weird fruity flavor. I can't quite put my finger on sometimes.
So yeah, I've heard people talk about Pilsner malt as having kind of like a, and I've experienced it a few times, almost like a white wine. Grape in it, because and a part of that I think is just because it's so clean, which again, for me, throwing some Vienna and kind of bump up that maltness, that malt character to sort of balance out that super clean crispness. If you're not looking for that, at least.
Yeah, it's funny. So the last experiment tasting I did, it was like, I can't remember the proportions, but it was like something like 98% Pilsner malt. And one of the guys who did the tasting, all he said he could taste was corn. And like, it's definitely not corn, but like it tastes exactly as though you were chewing on the grain. Right.
Which I love that, by the way. That's something that I really look forward to. And to me is a sign of a well-made beer that's not oxidized. Because that, I think with oxidation, you start covering up some of that real genuinely tasty malt character.
For sure. Yeah. And I think this is also a style or a variety that he probably hadn't had before.
Yeah, so. Possibly. Now, because we are talking about Vienna malt, before we get into Munich malt, I do think it's important to at least spend some time talking about Vienna lager, which for many, when they think of Vienna lager, and it makes sense, they're thinking of sort of a moderate to dark brownish, delicious, kind of toasty Mexican lager, which I love Negra Modelo. That's when I'm making a Vienna lager these days. Usually what I'm doing, and so that people don't have to ask, I'll go 98% Vienna malt, whatever Vienna malt you can get your hands on. The latest one that I made was with the Mecca Great Estate malt Venora. Oh my word. Talk about malty. It's so good.
I'm looking forward to cracking that bag open.
It's so good. Oh yeah. You just got some, you got to try it, man. 100%. I'd recommend starting off going 100% because they just have such characterful malts anyways. But, so what I'll usually do is balance that out with 2% pale chocolate. Sounds weird. Not regular chocolate malt, not roasted barley, but you have to use 1 to 2% pale chocolate. It gives the beer just this beautiful orangey hue and adds this nutty, toasty thing that is to die for. And then I'll hop it at first wort hop, and then I'll throw in a 30-minute edition and maybe a 10 or a 15-minute edition of my favorite Tettninger, about 15 grams for a 5-gallon batch at each of those. Nice bitterness. I'll ferment it, at 66 degrees with either Imperial Harvest, or I've also used Global, and I've used Urkel, and all three of those clean, wonderful, delicious, fermentation character, even when fermented slightly warm. And I can't recommend that recipe enough. It's one of my favorites.
So want a Vienna lager right now.
I know, me too. Well, okay, let's talk about Munich malt.
Munich malt, very similar to Vienna malt. It's just spent more time in the kiln and also at higher temperatures. So I think, based on the research I did over the past few days, starts maybe around 104 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Celsius, and also increases as time goes on, up to as high as 250 degrees Fahrenheit and 121 degrees Celsius. The difference being that not only with that temperature, but it almost lasts about twice as long. Whereas, the Vienna malt was malted or kilned for about 1 day. Munich malt is usually maybe around 2 days.
Okay. So it's picking up more of that roasted, not roasted barley. That's what we're talking about, but picking up more of that kind of roasty, toasty character as compared to Vienna.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that will be increased quite a bit for the darker Munich varieties.
Right. Well, okay. So now I did a little bit of research on this, and what I could find. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, because you may have found some different info on it. Munich malt really is, there's nothing different than Vienna in terms of the malting process. It's all in the kilning. It's basically just darker version of ultimately Pilsner malt, but Vienna is darker than Pilsner, and then Munich is darker than Vienna. Is kind of the way my mind thinks about it.
Yeah, no, that's similar to what I found as well. It's all basically the same spring 2-row barley. It's just kilned differently.
Yeah. Now there are different types of Munich malt. There's Munich Light, Munich Dark. Some people call it Munich 1, Munich 2, or they'll call it by the actual color of the Lovibond of the malt. In my experience, Munich, I've never actually purchased in bulk the darker version of Munich. To me, it is usable as 100% of the grist. It's definitely a base malt. But in my experience using it, even at I think the highest I've ever used it was 30%. It really has an interesting characteristic that it imparts to beer. Almost, and this may sound really weird, and I don't mean to confuse people, but I get like a sourdough bread characteristic from the darker Munich malt. Not that it's sour, but I do feel like there's something that it contributes that has that interesting tangy bready thing going on,
like doughy bready. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but also again, sourdough doesn't taste sour to me. It just has something unique. It has that fermentation thing going on, and that's what I've always gotten from beers that I've brewed and that others have brewed with high amounts of the darker Munich malt. Have you had any experience with that with the darker Munich?
Yeah, I actually only used it once in my wedding beer I made a couple years ago.
From Russia with Love.
That's the one. Yep.
We love that beer.
Oh, so good. I can't wait to open the next bottle.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, and I think, I can't remember what the grist was like. I think it was like maybe 15%. And, I had so many roasted grains in there. It's really hard to say whether or not you can discern those Munich 2 characteristics, but that beer did turn out very nicely.
Oh, it was delicious. And so one of the things about the darker Munich, like I said, like you used in From Russia with Love, I do think that a lot of people rely on it more for character malts. However, it is very common, and I've seen this over the years quite a bit, that people, when they're making Munich Dunkel, which again, regional style there, when they're making a Dunkel, that they'll use up to 100% dark Munich malt, something I've never done, but I'd be interested. There's this interesting idea floating around out there that and it's been proven in some respects, but that, you can use, for example, if you use 20% of dark Munich with 80% Pilsner, that the character you're going to get from the 20% of the dark Munich can be quite noticeably different than if you'd go at 100%. And I'm not talking about the obvious, it's going to be richer and stronger. I'm talking about actual flavor development can shift up and be different. So perhaps, when at 20 or 30% of the grist brings out, for me at least, that sourdough character, but at 100% for a Munich Dunkel, maybe you do get that nice toasty, not too, this is a weird descriptor that I use, but not too wet on the palate. Sometimes you have those beers, you want that dryness.
It's kind of heavy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's something I'm willing to try.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting, actually. Now I kind of want to make like a Schwartz beer or maybe alt beer that way.
Well, in my Schwartz beer, I use a charge of pale Munich. And another thing that people got to keep in mind when you're looking at the lighter Munichs, they range. I think Weyermann is known for their light Munich being like 7 Lovibond, so it's not that much darker than Vienna malt. Just 3 to 4 degrees, something like that.
Still like double, right?
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Considerably, yeah.
So when you're picking out your light Munich malt, I think it's a good idea at least just to be aware of what the Lovibond actually is. I have been keeping around various different types of Munich malt in bulk for 6 years now. And I really do like Weyermann's Munich malt. I've had Best Malt's Munich malt, and I forget exactly how dark theirs is. Again, the Metallius, which is that's Mecca Grade. I think that's what it's called. That's Mecca Grade State Malt's version of Munich malt. It's a bit darker, and to me, whereas with some of the more, I guess, bigger maltsters, I get more of that kind of warm. It sways a little bit more toward like, not roasted like coffee roast, but you get kind of this warm toasty character out of it. A bit rich. I've gotten a slight hint of cherry when I use it at about 10% of the grist, which I think is interesting. Yeah, I know. It's interesting. Well, with Mechas though, to me, it's like graham cracker. And I think they write that in their description, but that's a nail on description of their Munich malt, and it's very good.
Yeah. They're definitely spot on with their description. Yeah, I don't know. I can't remember what best malt, because I've definitely used their Munich as well, but I don't remember what it was like. MFB, Malto Franco Belge, whatever. I can't remember what the actual maltster's name is, but MFB Munich malt is also pretty light in 7, I think. And I feel like that is one of the more exceptional Munich malts out there.
Yeah, I've used it as well. Very, very good stuff. When I'm using Munich malt, and again, this is on the lighter side of that malt, I'm kind of expecting, again, more toasty and whatever, in that, if you take that descriptor and then break it down for the various different maltsters, again, you might get kind of a toasted bread type of thing. You might get more of the melanoidy, that burnt edges of the bread type of characteristic. All of that to me is good. You just got to try them out for yourself. I'm a huge fan, again, of the graham cracker thing that I've been getting from Mecca Grade Estate Malts Munich malt, but I also love that lighter Weirmann, really dry, toasty character that I get from their Munich malt as well. Lighter Munich malts you can use up to 100%, as we've said a million times already. You can also use it as a character malt. Again, so we're talking about the dark Munich malt getting used at 100% for Munich Dunkel. In fact, we're going to talk about this in a bit. I used I made a Märzen that was just 100% light Munich malt. Absolutely delicious, beautiful beer, looked exactly like you would expect it. And it was sort of accidental. I was actually brewing it for the experiment we're going to talk about. And I thought, man, why am I throwing all of these weird malts into my Märzen recipe when I can just use a straight Munich malt? And it was delicious.
Why muddy the waters?
Exactly. Now, smaller proportions, of course, can be used to accentuate malt character. Again, we were talking about this with Vienna malt. And I hear this quite a bit with people. You can add up, something like 3%. I think it was Randy Mosier who was saying that he recommends he does these consulting with pro breweries and whatnot, and brewers who are looking to up a little bit of malt character in their beer, in their IPAs, but without making it have that. A lot of people just defer to crystal malt, and he'll say, no, you can use Munich malt, 5 to 10% of Munich malt, and you'll add nice little bit of color, and you'll get really nice malt backbone without being or perceptibly tasting sweet.
Absolutely, yeah, that is sound advice.
It's something that I've been doing for a while now. The other neat thing that you can use the lighter Munich for, and I don't make this style often, but New England IPA, a lot of people want their New England IPA to look like orange juice. Consider throwing just a little whisper of Munich malt in your grist, and that'll bump up that orange color quite nicely, actually. And with all that yeast in suspension, I'm just kidding. Well, obviously, Vienna and Munich malts are made using unique processes, but just how different are they? I was curious to find out for myself, and I put it to the test. Results when we return. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brow Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrow brewing system. Modeled after the brew-in-a-bag method, the Unibrow uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrow is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrow, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
It's not so common these days, but back when I was just getting started with all grain brewing, I recall quite a few folks not only mistaking Vienna and Munich malts as specialty grains, but speaking of them as being largely interchangeable. I've used both extensively at this point. In fact, I buy them both in bulk. I have probably 30 pounds of each sitting in my garage right now. And based on my experience with them, I was pretty convinced they were different. To see if I was right, that wasn't the whole impetus, I designed an experiment to test it out. So what I did is I brewed two batches of beer, 100% Vienna malt and 100% Munich malt. Really, really simple. They're both 5-gallon batches. I did both of them were full volume, no sparge mashes at 153 degrees Fahrenheit for 60 minutes at 67 C. Some of the things that I was interested in was all of the objectively measurable stuff between the two. Now, I don't measure mash pH as much as I used to anymore, and I'll admit that's based on those experiments that we've done with lower and higher mash pHs. But I was interested in how different that 3 to 4 degree Lovibond difference between Vienna and Munich, the impact that would have on mash pH. And sure enough, the paler Vienna malt, the mash pH was right at 5.19, which is I couldn't be more perfect on that. 5.2, I think, is what a lot of people aim for. And that darker roasted Munich malt was at 4.88 or around 4.9 pH. Pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, and that's typical with anything that's sort of higher in Lovibond there. You're going to get a little bit more acidic wort there.
Yeah, that's I think pretty common knowledge, right? The more roast you get, the more acid or more acidic that grain becomes. So I guess no huge surprise if you were really concerned about your mash pH, which to me 4.8 doesn't matter much. But you could balance that out by adding maybe a little baking soda or pickling lime. I left these ones alone because the way we were looking at it was that this was a function of the variable. We wanted to see what would happen if we did these 200%, of either malt without being adjusted too much. Both batches were boiled for only 30 minutes because I'm crazy, and each received 18 grams of Magnum right at first wort hopping. So as soon as I loudered the wort over to the kettle, I added some hops while it was being brought up to a boil, and then at 15 minutes left in the boil, each one was hit with 30 grams of Hallertau Mittelfrüh, one of my favorite noble hops. At the end of the boil, I took OG measurements, hydrometer readings or refractometer readings. The Vienna, 100% Vienna lager beer, or it wasn't a Vienna lager. Not yet. The 100% Vienna malt beer was at 1048 OG, while the Munich malt beer was at 1050 OG. Okay, here's the thing. This has little to do with Vienna versus Munich, but it's something I think is interesting. We just got done talking about how the Munich malt mash was at 4.88 pH. And for a lot of people, they're going to look at that and say, well, that's going to impact your conversion efficiency in a negative way. To me, this, not only have we done experiments on this that we'll talk about later in a different show, but the fact the Munich malt one with that low mash pH actually had a higher OG to me just sort of goes to show that maybe it's not, I don't know, mash pH isn't that.
I did notice that too. I was curious though about the timing. Like, I wonder if you had done this again, but had done like a longer mash, if that would have been different. And even like, it looks as though they finished out at different gravities as well, right?
Yeah, they did. So they were both fermented with Imperial Yeast L13 Global. It was a starter that I split evenly between each batch. The beers fermented for 6 days at 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 16 degrees Celsius before the temperature was raised to 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees C for a 4-day diacetyl rest. The Vienna malt beer finished at 1010 FG. Now, this is interesting. The Munich malt beer finished at 1017 FG. Do you think maybe that was a mash pH issue, or?
Well, I think it might be more of a diastatic power issue.
That was my thought as well. Yeah.
Just, the enzymes not having enough time to fully convert like they might, under different circumstances. But then again, like most of the conversion happens within like 15, 20 minutes anyway. Yeah. So who knows? I don't know. Yeah.
And it could just be also, the darker the more, I guess the darker a grain gets or the longer it's kilned. One of the things that I've heard is that, the less likely it is to, I guess, attenuate, if the beers attenuate further down. So that was a little anecdote that somebody told me a while back, and seeing it here now, if I had seen a beer finish at 1017 FG 5 or 6 years ago, I would just automatically presume that it was going to be a sweet, sticky mess. And I can tell you right now that this beer was not a sweet, sticky mess.
I'm sure it was not.
It was good. Yeah. I reduced the temperature after fermentation was complete, and I confirmed that these beers had indeed reached their FG. I reduced the temperature for cold crashing. I fined both of them with gelatin because I wanted them to look good. I then racked the beers to kegs a couple days later. They were burst carbonated at 50 PSI for 14 hours in my keezer. And then I reduced the gas to serving pressure, let them condition for another week. And then I started serving them to participants. Now, right off the bat, if you're looking at a picture of these beers, they are pretty markedly different.
Oh, yes.
As one might expect, the Vienna malt beer is nice and pale, really yellow. The Munich malt beer has what I would call a copper color.
For sure, yeah. I would call it copper amber, yeah.
They're both quite pretty. I think their clarity looks about identical between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Now, I know some people hate the fact that we fine our beers every once in a while, but it would be interesting, I'll admit, to have seen if either of the malts had some sort of an impact on ultimate clarity, being that they were fermented with the same yeast and whatnot.
My gut tells me that wouldn't be the case, but then again, we've been surprised here before, so
exactly. And ultimately, I mean, we're not testing people for when we're doing the triangle test, we're not testing people on appearance. We actually tell them to ignore appearance and serve them beers in opaque cups so that they can't pay attention to the appearance. Now, these beers, some people were asking if the foam on the top of the Munich beer looked different and was a different color than the Vienna one. You had to look really, really hard, and they had to be both in clear glasses so you could kind of hold them up to the light, but otherwise they looked really similar. All right, so in my own personal triangle test attempts, I took 7 of those. I was able to identify the odd beer out, and for us, those are switching up, and I had other people serving these to me at different times and during different data collection sessions. Out of those 7, I got it right 5 times, so pretty noticeably different in my opinion. The beers were way more similar than I expected, though, and that kind of explains why I wasn't able to get all 7 of my triangle test attempts right. I really had to focus hard to tell the beers apart, and I could easily understand how some might struggle to pick the odd beer out, and it's hard when you are blind anyways, and then you can't see the beers. To me, though, the Munich malt beer had a stronger malt character, similar to a Märzen, like I mentioned before. And this was the experiment where I realized that my Märzen recipe is just going to be 100% Munich from now on. It did have some toasted bread character, which was really nice, but also a nice little slight hint of honey. Not sweet, though, but that honey flavor, which I thought was really, really appealing. The Vienna malt beer, have you gotten that honey type of thing from Munich malt before? Or?
I have not. I've heard people describe it that way, though. I've gotten honey character in different beers that did not have Munich malt in them, nor did they have honey.
I was going to say,
but, yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah, and this was the first time I'd noticed it. And again, to go back to that thing, perhaps it's something that comes out as you increase the actual amount of the malt being used. But whatever it was very, very enjoyable. Now, the Vienna malt beer had a similar malt sweetness, and that surprised me because I expected, the Munich malt beer finished with a higher FG. It was darker. It just kind of had that. It kind of gave me the impression that it was going to be sweeter. But interestingly, to me, the Vienna malt beer has kind of had the same version of that maltiness, and it just wasn't as different as I was expecting. The beer ultimately was slightly lighter on my palate, and had a very curious, almost like raw bread dough thing going on. Again, very enjoyable. I think people overall kind of were, if you were, served 2 pitchers of these, they were probably going for the Vienna one because of the way it looked. Right. But a lot of people, once they tasted that Munich malt beer, one of the comments they were giving me was, "Whoa, this looks darker than it tastes."
Yeah, and I really love the idea of tricking people into drinking something dark, and they really enjoy it, and they look at it and like, "Oh my God, this is dark."
Yeah, the people who say they're not dark beer people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I ended up serving these beers to 21 participants, out of which 12 would need to identify the unique sample in order for us to say it was significant. And in the end, 13 people, or 62% of the participant pool, actually did identify the odd beer out, allowing us to say that people could reliably tell these beers apart. No huge surprise, right? But the fact that not 100% of people couldn't tell them apart, the fact that I couldn't identify the odd beer out 100% of the time, to me was really revealing. These malts, I guess sort of understand the claim that you could use these interchangeably if you don't care about color contribution.
Yeah, maybe. I would say that these malts are more similar than they are different.
Yeah, on some levels, in terms of flavor and aroma, I would say, in a weird way, that they are similar enough to where I wouldn't, if somebody's saying, "Well, you ran out of Vienna, go and use some Munich malt," I'm probably not going to jump in and tell them how horrible of advice that is.
Yeah, well, I would say that it would never be horrible advice, but yeah.
So out of the 13 correct participants, 6 of them did prefer the Vienna malt beer. 5 of them preferred the Munich malt beer, and 2 had no preference despite perceiving a difference. Even the people who liked the Vienna malt beer more, or who said they liked the Munich malt beer more, both of them, or all of those people, really enjoyed both of those beers. These were not beers that people just generally didn't like. The kegs kicked really fast, and I say that because I've made quite a few beers that are mostly Vienna malt these days, or mostly Munich malt, or whatever, up anywhere from 95% to 100%, and almost universally they turn out really, really well. If you're into nice, clean, beer flavored beer type beers, give this a shot. It works out quite well.
Absolutely, yeah. And bring back the beer. Get me away from everything else. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Well, one thing, before we get into some reader comments here, one thing that I was kind of surprised about was the Munich malt beer had this lack of a cherry thing. The reason I find that surprising is I noticed this cherry-like flavor years ago when drinking a beer that a friend made that was really high in Munich malt. And after mentioning it, we all, my group of brewing friends, we all started noticing this almost like dark cherry flavor that you got when using high proportions of Munich malt. And so I expected that fully to be in the 100% Munich malt beer that I made for this experiment, and it just wasn't there. To take a good example of a Märzen, that nice orange type of beer, and that really is what this 100% Munich malt beer tasted like. Fantastic beer in the end for being a single malt beer, I guess.
Yeah, bring back the single malt beers, man. Don't be afraid.
It works.
You don't need a ton of crystal. You don't need sugar. You don't need lactose. All that other crap. Just use one malt. You're good. We're
gonna get so much hate for bringing up lactose in a Munich versus Vienna. I know.
Oh my God.
I know. I'm with you on that one, but we'll leave it alone. People like their milkshake beers. Sure. All right, some reader comments. First one comes from Rich. He says, were the tasters blindfolded? I think he's tongue-in-cheek there. Without even tasting, it's clear which sample is different just based on the color, at least in the clear glassware. I could understand if the tasters couldn't see the samples, that they might not be able to identify it just based on taste.
Yeah, bring out the blindfolds next time, Marshall. Come on.
We already addressed this before. This is a question we get a lot, so I included it in the reader comments. These beers looked drastically different. If we had served these in clear glasses, I had a friend joke with me one time when I first started doing the triangle tests. he says, why are you serving these in opaque glasses? They should be in clear glasses because appearance is equally as important as flavor and aroma. I said, yeah, man. But you serve these two beers to people, and without even tasting them, they're going to pick the odd beer out. That's no fun. We're looking to see if these people can perceive a difference in terms of aroma, flavor, and mouthfeel. So, like I mentioned before, this kind of finer detail, the foam on these beers was a little bit different. The Munich Malt one naturally was slightly, ever so slightly darker. But when poured into the colored cups that we use, the reflection from the color, I believe the Munich Malt one was in the red cup for this experiment. It makes the foam look kind of red. You put a beer with a perfectly white cap of foam. Yeah, a little. I try to pay attention to that. Well, you know what? I think the cups that you have a white inside liner, something like that.
Yeah, they do. Yep.
The ones that we used to get, which come from the same place, they used to be all fully colored, which I like a little better. But we can only use what we got. So,
Sure.
But no, the readers or the participants were not blindfolded per se, but they did have the appearance hidden from them. So that's standard practice for us. The next comment comes from James. He said, did the Munich beer have a noticeable difference in mouthfeel given the large difference in FGs between the two? Well, according to the data, that may have been one of the things that people noticed because it was significant. But in my experience, the mouthfeel between the two beers was close to identical. And that's something that I've experienced with, like I mentioned earlier, with both Vienna and Munich. They contribute this nice, almost velvety-like mouthfeel.
Yeah, my inclination is that they would be, again, more similar than they are different. If there was a difference in the mouthfeel, then I guess I would have to guess it would be the Munich would be slightly heavier and a little bit more lingering on the palate, but I do think they would be drastically similar.
Yeah, so, you look at the stats of both Vienna and Munich Malt. We talked a little bit about those earlier. I don't think there's a huge difference between the protein content of a Vienna Malt and a Munich Malt.
No, let's see. Yeah, they're identical. Looking at the Weyermann Vienna and Munich 1, they're between 9.5% and 12.5% on both of them.
And that's largely responsible, or what people kind of you point the finger at when it comes to contributing foam and mouthfeel and whatnot, right?
Yeah, exactly. That and maybe some residual gravity, but.
Yeah, we've done a lot of experiments. We quite a few mash temperature experiments where one of the beers ends up at 1009 and the other one's at 1020, and people just cannot distinguish them based on that. Mm-hmm. I understand the reasoning behind high FG sweet beer. I get that, or more mouthfeel. I just don't think that it's accurate, and I'm saying that with a fair amount of conviction, only because we've done so much experimentation with. Well, and it could be secondary part of the experiment, but these beers finish at different FGs, and that's not really. If we find significance, that's not the reason people are claiming that gave it away for them was the mouthfeel or the sweetness or whatever it was. So
right, exactly, yeah. But it's people like to draw back on that a lot, so I felt like I had to mention it.
Yeah, well, good job for mentioning it then.
Right.
All right. The next comment comes from Jim Dunlap. He says, I'm puzzled by how low the pH came out on these beers, having very soft Seattle water. Go Seahawks. I do observe lower pH readings with the majority Munich or Vienna malt beer, but these numbers are extremely low compared to my results. Why not add slaked lime or baking soda to adjust in the normal range of 5.2 to 5.5? Assuming these are room temp numbers, they're unusually low. One of them
you
was
could do that, but you were controlling for the variable here, right? So you didn't want to adjust.
Yeah, and people are gonna, I'm not dissing this, but people have, fairly regularly told us you should have done this in an experiment or you shouldn't have done this.
Right.
Do it yourself, man, and let us know. We're happy to share your results. In this one, again, the whole point, I may have adjusted the water. But I adjusted it exactly the same for both batches. I wasn't going to add slaked lime to, for example, the Munich malt beer. Because how do we know that that's not going to be responsible for the difference then,
Right.
We really wanted to test out the difference between these two malts, hence the pH difference. Now, he says they were both really low. The Vienna malt one was 5.2, basically 5.18, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it might be on the lower end of that mash pH or expected mash pH for that beer, but I wouldn't say it's too low.
No, I mean, to me, it's kind of dead on where you want it to be. Now, yeah, right. I'd say the Munich malt beer, the mash did get down, a bit lower than you might expect, but and maybe that is responsible for the higher FG. I mean, there's no way for us to know that exactly now, but the beer turned out really good, and I didn't have any other issues with fermentation or anything like that. So,
yeah, and I think some German beer styles like to mash kind of high on the pH, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
I believe Weirmann put out and there was some contradictions about this, but I think Weirmann put something out where I don't know if they mash too high or mash really low. It's one of those though, kind of outside of the accepted range. Yeah. Yeah.
I think I remember a Pilsner being mashed at like 5.5 or something silly like that. I was like, oh wow.
But I mean, even then, like 5.5 to me, that's who cares? That's it's within that range,
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So Jim, I don't Seattle water. If it's as soft as I give, surprisingly soft water here in Fresno as well. And I don't adjust my mash pH anymore. Poo poo on me. I don't. That's fine. But just again, after those experiments that we did, I don't worry too much about it. I do always adjust. I mineralize my water, and so both of these were mineralized. But again, I could have added slaked lime, but I would have had to do it to both, and I didn't want to do that. So, all right. Next piece of feedback comes from Sam O'Neill. He says, I work at a brewery in Germany, and the brewmaster told me that a classmate of his from brewing school took a job at Weirmann after their studies, and this classmate apparently told my boss that their Vienna malt is just Munich 1, so their light Munich, blended off with their pale or Pilsner malt. Could have been bullshit, obviously, but why would he lie about something like that? I'll ask my boss about it again today. Now, this could be kind of a contentious thing. I don't know the answer to this. I'm going to tell you that right off the bat. But a guy named Tom replied to Sam and said this. I just think it's interesting. On a tour of Stammig malting in Vienna, the maltster told us that nowadays Vienna is a blend of Munich and Pilsner. We were surprised about this, but he insisted this was the case everywhere. I assume he was referring to maltsters in the German-speaking world. I asked some brewers about this after, and one of them said that he had heard this before from another brewer. So it sounds like it's not a terribly new or uncommon idea that Vienna malt is just Pilsner malt mixed with a little bit of, sounds like Munich malt.
It sounds like it might be the most efficient way for the maltsters to get all those products out, right? If you could just make a blend of two different ones and you have a third one. So just from an efficiency standpoint, it makes sense to me, but I have no idea if that's actually the case.
Yeah, I don't want to be the one responsible for throwing, these maltsters on the bus for their Vienna malt or whatever, but it would be a fascinating experiment, and I'm sure somebody commented on this on the article as well, to compare Vienna malt to a blend, they'd all have to be the same maltster, right? But if we took Vienna malt, say we did like 12 pounds of Vienna malt, and then you work out to achieve the same color, Pilsner with a little bit of Munich malt, a certain percentage of Munich malt, and compare those two. I think that'd be a fascinating experiment. See if people could tell them apart.
That sounds super fun.
Yeah,
sign me up.
You're on it, dude. Get on it, man. I do think that malt blend experiments are really interesting. We haven't done too many. I think Jake did one where he did the whole crystal malt thing, right? So if you take a little bit of 60 and a little bit of 10, can you make C40 basically? And some interesting results on that one. We'll have to do a show on it soon. Final comment comes from Reddit user Jono89. Says, I love Vienna and use it as 100% of the grist in a few IPAs and session IPAs. Awesome bit of sweetness that reminds me of a Honeycrisp apple. Very interesting. Definitely not acetaldehyde, he says. It's great for a clean beer with just a bit extra on the malt side. Honeycrisp apple. What do you think of that descriptor? That's not something that I can... Now, I love Honeycrisp apples, but that's not something that I can say I've picked up from the Vienna malt beers that I've made, though that could just be a matter of me not being as good at describing stuff as Jono89 here, because to me, the Vienna malt beer I had kind of that bready, toasty thing. Maybe he's perceiving more of a Honeycrisp thing, or maybe he's using a different maltster.
Well, I think it's all those things. Different maltsters are going to have different products, and then people are going to have their own subjective experience, right? So who knows? I don't know. I've never tasted any sort of fruity characteristics with Vienna. And you said you got a cherry one from Munich. Is that right?
Yeah, it was a and it's something that I've tasted quite a few times. But again, I'm fully aware that I could just be making that up because I'm biased. But this very slight, almost like if you used to go to Kmart and get those ices, like the red ices, and when it would melt down, that smell. It was just a whisper of that, and I would pick it up in a few. And I've picked it up in a few beers made with big proportions of Munich malt.
That's really interesting. Yeah, no, I've never had anything like that with Munich or Vienna. But like I was talking about earlier with getting a sort of apple flavor in Pilsner malt, but not the Vienna. So,
right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, Pilsner malt is kind of known for having kind of a, I think Malcolm refers to it as white grape skin, and kind of just that. There's something there that's got this fruity note to it that I think a lot of people find very pleasant. I certainly do. I love the recommendation to use Vienna for session IPA. I don't make much IPA, but I do love me a really nice, well-made session IPA. The problem that I tend to experience with session IPA is that they're often thin, kind of boring, and they leave your mouth and then there's nothing left over. To me, Vienna malt is a perfect solution, or at least a part of the solution to fixing that issue. If you're throwing just a bunch of regular old pale malt, well, not even a bunch, right? You're using a very small amount in order to get this session IPA low OG. It makes sense that it's going to be kind of watery, and those pale malts can be, again, they're good. We use them all the time. But on their own, even when you're trying to balance it out with other character malts, they just don't add that much oomph. And to me, it seems like Vienna would be a really, really good replacement, even at 100% of any of the pale malt you might use in a lower OG, session IPA, or even could be a session whatever, just to add that mouthfeel. It's definitely something that I've picked up, and I have not done this yet, but I definitely plan to try.
Yeah, Vienna is absolutely a wonderful substitute for any base malt if you want to have just more malt character, something that's a little bit less one-dimensional, I guess you could say.
Yeah, no, perfect way to talk about that. I do appreciate the idea there, Jono89, for using it in a session IPA. I think I'm going to add that to my list to be brewed shortly. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. Anything else you'd like to add about Vienna and or Munich malts before we head out, Phil?
I think that everybody who's listening to this needs to make a 100% Munich and 100% Vienna beer.
I could not agree more. If you're looking at Märzen recipes and you go to Brewlosophy and you find my Mocktoberfest, I don't brew that anymore. That's just the nature of evolving palates and evolving methods. But 100% Munich malt, probably the best Märzen I've ever made. Absolutely love it. Same thing, 100% Vienna malt, delicious beer. Don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to read up on the experiment discussed in this episode, as well as everything else we are up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through no middleman.